Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Gorowski, and I'll be your host for today. Always look forward to these events. Every September, sometimes October, we get to connect with the Boise State University's Intermountain Bird Observatory to do some songbird banding research, and sometimes we get to meet the birds of prey as well, where they do it up on the mountaintop. So today we're going to focus on the songbirds. We're going to get to see the scientists in the field, see some of the migrating birds up close at the Lucky Peak Research Station, and then hopefully get a chance to see the birds being captured, banded, measured, weighed as they make their way south for the winter, and learn a little bit more about why it's so important to be studying these migrating songbirds. So today we have Heidi Carlisle joining us. She's the education director at the Intermountain Bird Observatory. So let's bring her in front and center. Hey, Heidi, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. It's always great to have you with us. You never know what we're going to see. I think one time in the past, we had a Krat brother show up. We've had all kinds of hawks. You never know what's going to happen when we connect with Idaho.
Yeah. Well, I have a quick surprise for you guys, and then I'll do more of an introduction. So we're here at our songbird banding station, but this morning, a little sharp-shinned hawk flew into our songbird banding nets. So this is a very tiny, tiny little raptor. You can see there's my hand in comparison to him. You can see his little band on his leg. And he probably flew into our nets this morning because he was chasing after our songbirds. These guys are bird eating specialists. So he's already banded and measured. So I just held on to him for a second to show you guys, and then I'm going to let him fly. So let me see if I can figure out my camera and how to show you guys this guy flying off. Here we go. So he's going to fly off back into the woods. There we go. So normally we don't catch hawks in our songbird nets, so that's a special treat. I'm going to give you guys a quick intro and then show you some birds because we actually have a lot this morning. We're at a fall migration station. We're in the mountains outside of Boise, Idaho, and it's right at the tip of the Rocky Mountains. So it serves as sort of a natural funnel for migrating birds that are coming from the north, from Alaska, Canada, northern Idaho, and passing through us to get south for the winter. A lot of these species are heading to the southern United States, Mexico, and some of them even head down into Central America. So if we have any birds ready to let go, I'll let you guys watch them fly. But first, let's try to show. So here's one of our scientists checking the fat on a bird, which I haven't even explained yet. Oh yeah, so you guys can see there's some reddish chest muscle, and then orange. Man, that guy is fat. And then some orange up on the top of the chest.
He also has a thick layer of fat on his belly and under both wings.
Nice. Yeah, cool. Really fat. So I was about to say, the main things we're studying on these migrating birds is their fat. Fat is the gas in their gas tank for migration. So that was a little white-crowned sparrow that is like ready to migrate. And it probably looked a little weird. So Arden was blowing on the chest of that bird to move the feathers out of the way. And their skin is so thin that it's see-through. So we can actually see the color of their muscle and their fat. And on a skinny bird, we can actually even see through their skin and see their intestines, all the twists and turns of their intestines inside their body. So pretty crazy. We have a bunch of birds this morning at our banding station. Our scientist team is processing them. So we catch them in nets out in the forest. We bring them back to the banding station. And then we hold them for about a minute or two while we collect some data. So we're looking, of course, at what species they are, but also measuring their fat and their muscle. Muscle, powers their migration flight. And we're looking at the health of the birds as well as their age, and if we can identify if they're a male or a female. So I'll get a little closer here. So a little chickadee in his hand. He's recording all the data on that data sheet. And then as we finish each bird, we let them go back into the wild. So we get to see these birds up close for just a short amount of time, get some information about them, and then release them back into the habitat behind me. So it's fall migration. This is an area with lots of good habitat. So you can see behind me, there's some nice big Douglas fir trees. There's some cherry shrubs, and these shrubs have lots and lots of food for different birds that pass through here. If they're fruit-eating birds, they can eat the cherries. And if they're insect-eating birds, there's actually a lot of insects that like to grow and live on those cherries as well. So, yeah, you can see we're very busy this morning. It sounds like we got a bunch of chickadees. Is that right, guys? All chickadees, which they're one of the cuter species that we catch. They also are one of the more feisty species that we catch. So as we are holding them and processing them, you'll hear them sometimes squeak at us with their little chickadee voices. Sometimes they'll even try to bite us, even though they're tiny little guys. Is this one done? Yeah. All right. Hello. Speaking of biting. So here's a little bird. This is that chickadee that Lucian just finished banding. So you can see mountain chickadees have these little angry white eyebrows and this nice black and white patterned face. I'm holding this bird in what's called bander's grip. So my two fingers are going over their shoulders, kind of like if you go on a roller coaster. You might have those two big straps over your shoulders that are holding you securely so that you don't fall out of the roller coaster. So my fingers are doing that. And then my hand isn't touching the bird's body, but I'm allowing this little bird to perch on my fingers so that they feel comfortable. You can see the little tiny band on this bird's leg. So it's an aluminum band, really lightweight metal. If you've ever held an empty pop can, you know how lightweight those soda cans can be. And so that little bracelet has a 9-digit number that identifies this bird. So this one ends in 812. So this is chickadee number 812. No other chickadee in the world will have this number. So now that we've processed this little one, we'll let it fly. So let me hold my camera here. And here we go. Off back into the wild. So these mountain chickadees are a species that don't migrate very far. They actually spend a lot of the winter up in the mountains of Idaho, and we're seeing a record number of chickadees and nuthatches, which are all seed-eating birds. And it's a big research question for us. We don't have the answer yet, but we often see eruptions like this, so really big numbers of species, for two reasons, and they're very different reasons. One reason could be because there was a lot of food this summer, and so all the baby chickadees that hatched survived. And so there's tons and tons of baby chickadees around, and it means they're doing really well. It could also mean that they're a seed eater and there wasn't a lot of seed up north where they normally stay. And so they're coming down here searching for places that have more food. And maybe they've found it here at Lucky Peak. So the really cool thing is with banding information and the data we collect, we can piece together and answer that question. So at the end of the season, we'll look at how many of these chickadees were young and how many of them were adults. And if there's tons and tons of young chickadees in our data set, then we know, okay, so it was a really good year for these chickadees. All the little baby chickadees survived and had plenty of food and are doing well. I think that's my hypothesis. Have you guys been mostly catching young birds, young chickadees and nuthatches? All right, here's another one. This one's a little more feisty. So you can see these birds, they've never met a human before in their life. They are wild animals. And so they do sometimes try to give us a little nibble as we're processing them, which I feel like we probably deserve. We're taking 10 minutes out of their day when they could be eating or hanging out with their friends to collect the data that we're collecting. That's something important for us as scientists. We love birds. That's why we have this job. And so we always want to make sure that the data we're collecting and the research we're doing is worth this bird's time, right? So we took their time out of their day to get this information. We want to make sure it's useful and that we use it to contribute to bird conservation. So again, we don't hold them very long, so I'll let this little guy go. I don't know if you guys could hear him chatter, but he's sitting in the branches, shaking his feathers, getting all the human cooties off, and then yelling at us, going chickadee dee 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 dee. All right. Yeah, we have a lot of birds. So it's interesting because yesterday we did not have that many birds. We only caught about 20 the whole day. And today we're catching, we probably already have 20 this morning. So as weather changes up here, we see big changes in the number of birds that are at our banding station. So we're about to have a cold front come through, and birds can sense that barometric pressure change, and they know the weather is changing. So my guess is a lot of these birds are saying, hey, cold weather's coming, we got to get moving. And so they're all kind of piling up at our station ready to go. I promise I'm not just grabbing the same bird over and over again. We're just catching that many chickadees. So here's another little mountain chickadee. You can tell they're a seed eater because they have a pretty stout beak. It's deep up and down. But these guys also eat insects in the summertime. So they're kind of a generalist species, and they're really well adapted for switching their food resources. So they're a bird that can eat a bunch of caterpillars and insects in the summertime. And then when it's cold, instead of fleeing and going down to Mexico or Central America, these birds just switch their diet. So instead of eating bugs, they start eating seeds. And so they can tough it out in really cold conditions. Mountain chickadees, if you, after this Zoom, if you look up this range map, you'll see they can be pretty far north in North America. So yeah, tough, tiny little birds. They weigh about 10 grams, so about the same as 10 big paper clips or 10 Skittles or 10 M&Ms. So not very big. All right. It's hard to aim my camera. Here we go. Okay, buddy, go join your friends. There we go. See if we have any other bird species around. Are they all chickadees? Oh, cool. We have a couple different species to show you guys when they're done processing. So you can see our scientists blowing on the birds. That's to look at that fat, to part their feathers out of the way. We're also measuring their wing length and weighing them, so to get an idea of their body mass. We look to see if they're growing any feathers, and then we spread their wings to look at their age. So we can actually identify the age of the bird just by spreading their wing and looking at the feathers in their wing. So kind of like maybe some of you guys have a mix of adult teeth and baby teeth in your mouth. Or like, especially when I see field trips of first graders always have a cool mix of different teeth in their mouth. And we can guess, you know, oh, okay, if you have a mix of adult teeth and baby teeth in your mouth, you're probably in elementary school. And we can do the same thing with these birds. If they have a mix of adult feathers and baby feathers on their wing, we can know that they were hatched this summer. So they're kind of young, you know, a couple month-old birds, but sort of teenagers. They're off on their own, maybe getting ready to go to bird college. They're off on their own. They're not following their parents on migration, so they're migrating just based on the little program in their head. Oh, sure. A different bird. Cool.
A young female.
Young female. All right. So we're going from biggest to smallest here this morning. So this is a ruby crowned kinglet. I'm guessing she weighed 5 or 6 grams. Maybe if she was fat, she weighed a little bit more. So 5 little paper clips, as much as the hummingbirds that we banned. And she's called a ruby crowned kinglet because the males have a ruby crown, but she doesn't have a little ruby crown on her head. She does have, oh, let me see. It's hard to aim this camera, right? She does have beautiful yellow edging on her tail, and some yellow edging on her wings. There we go. Yeah, you can see that yellow edging on her wings. So tiny, tiny little bird, and this is typically one of our most common species that we catch. I'm gonna let her fly off. There you go, sweetie. Oh, there she goes. Typically one of the more common species that we catch. So they're a short distance migrant. They might go down to like Arizona, so the southern United States for the winter. Not as far as some of the other species that we study. They're tough little birds too. They eat a lot of insects, but they're really good at finding insects hiding in bark. So they can stay the winter here in Idaho just by sneaking around and picking little insects out of cracks and crevices in trees or conifer needles. Another one, okay. You just have endless birds this morning. So this is another species. So this is an orange-crowned warbler, and they have quite a pointy beak. I think you guys can see that pretty well. So this little tweezer beak is really good at grabbing insects like aphids and gnats and caterpillars. So this is a species that doesn't like to spend the winter in Idaho. They head farther south. So places like California, like when I go visit San Diego in the winter, sometimes I see a lot of orange-crowned warblers in the trees. It's called an orange-crowned warbler because of this very dingy little hint of orange in that crown. It's almost not even visible. There, you can see it a little bit. So orange-crowned warbler. So this is a longer distance migrant. And let's see. Pretty darn fat. So fat in his gas tank. He's ready to migrate and continue south from here. So we'll wish this little guy luck. A lot of our songbird species migrate at night, so they actually can navigate using the stars. We also believe that birds can see the magnetic field, and so they're guided by kind of those directional cues to head south. They take off usually around sunset, and then jet south, up to 500 miles a night, some of these birds. So I bet you guys can all identify this species by now. In most years, we're very, very excited if we catch a mountain chickadee, and everybody's admiring them. But today, they're like the most common bird we're catching. So there's a lot of them. But yeah, they're pretty cute. So this year especially, I think we're getting really interesting information because we've actually passed the record. We've been banding here for 25 years, and we've caught a record number of red-breasted nuthatches this year, and I think we're approaching a record for a number of mountain chickadees too. So we've passed the record for mountain chickadees too, the crew says. So yeah, very interesting year up here. And the winter is kind of boring for us because we're not banding birds, but it's also really exciting because that's when we get to analyze our data. We get to reach out to other scientists at other banding stations and compare our information with theirs, and kind of piece together the story of what happened in a given year. So I'll show you guys the little band on this chickadee's leg again, so you can see it right there. Really lightweight. It's so lightweight that it doesn't register on our scale. So it's less than 1/10 of a gram. So this little guy, you guys probably can't hear it, but
we can definitely hear when you let the chickadees go, they give you a piece of their mind.
oh good, yeah, you guys can hear that?
Yeah, we can definitely hear them. Heidi, quick question for you before we take some questions from students. Are we able to get a little closer to see some of the measuring today, or is it too busy in the
yeah.
hide? Yeah?
Yeah,
Cool.
sure. Oh, I'll show you another chickadee and then
Why not?
Yeah. So just to give you guys a sense of how many chickadees we're catching, it's kind of crazy. So yeah, let's get a little closer and maybe I can narrate for you guys. So we have a scientist team. They come from all over the place. So we are hiring young scientists who come and work with us for about 3 months. They live up here on the mountain. You can see, so Lauren is taking a bird out of the bag, and surprise, it's a mountain chickadee. Arden in the middle there is using banding pliers. So to put the band around the bird's leg, we have pliers that have a little hole that allows us to squeeze the band without touching the bird's leg. And then Lucian just measured the wing on that bird. So nice job, guys. They're all at different steps of the data recording process. So part of why I was staying far away is because when I'm talking, I want to make sure these guys can hear their measurements, but I think they can probably concentrate. So measuring the wing and tail, figuring out age, and yeah, they're just going down the line, each little chickadee. So the rulers, when you guys go to the doctor's office, we measure how tall you are and how much you weigh, but for the birds, it's a little difficult. We probably couldn't measure how tall they were without them flying away. So instead, we measured their wing and their tail to give us an idea of body size. And then Mari and Chris just came back with birds on that run. So we check the nets every half hour. to go bring the birds back to the banding station. So you can probably hear all the blowing sounds too. So our scientists are all blowing on these birds to figure out those fat and muscle scores. We rate them, so kind of like you might rate a movie 5 stars or 1 star if you liked it or not. We rate the bird's fat on a scale from 1 to 5 at this station. So there you go.
All right. I think that's the busiest we've ever seen the hut. Just nonstop birds coming in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so Arden found this chickadee has a feather growing in. So it's always hard for me to aim my camera. You can see the little pin at the base of the feather. It's almost like a flower bud, so that feather is kind of blooming out of that pin and growing in. So somehow this chickadee lost some tail feathers. Maybe it was getting chased by a sharp-shinned hawk like the hawk we saw earlier. So, but yeah, so I can take questions and we can just keep watching the scientists band in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. It'd be great to keep seeing the action, but I think it's time that we take some questions.
Totally.
Busy place today, and great to see a few different species. Our little cameo from the sharp-shinned hawk was pretty darn cool as well. If you are tuning in via YouTube, use the comment section if you have any questions for Heidi about the bird banding action that we are seeing today. But for now, let's grab a couple camera classrooms and let's see what questions they have for us today. So South Lake Tahoe in the US, we have some online elementary students hanging out with Mrs. Rice. Let me bring Mrs. Rice in here. Hey, Mrs. Rice, how are you?
Hi, good morning. We are great. I would love for you to be able to see my class, but that's all right. We have some questions. I'm sorry, Rain, go ahead. Oh, I am muted for my class. Can you hear me, Joe? Classic.
I can hear you.
Muted.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, great. So we have some different questions in here in my chat box. We were wondering what the nets look like.
Yeah, so normally I walk you guys out to the nets, but we lost a good reception at our nets. So if you imagine a fishing net, they're really, really fine. So they're as thin as sewing thread, and they're really springy. So as the birds are flying back and forth between the trees, they run into the net, and the nets have little pockets. So they go down into the pocket almost like a little hammock. So then the birds are just hanging out in that little hammock until we check the nets and get them out. It takes a lot of training. So that's one of the first things we teach our scientist crew to do is to safely get the birds out of that little pocket and bring them back to the station. But yeah, the nets are called mist nets because they're really fine like mist.
We had one other question here about the bands and how they are tracked later on.
Yeah, so these bands we're putting on today are just aluminum bands. So they're just a little metal band with a number stamped into them. So kind of old-fashioned technology. They don't have any transmitting ability or GPS. So we are relying on other scientists recatching our birds to figure out where they go. One of the most valuable recaptures we get at our station is a recapture of a bird that we actually banded ourselves. So during migration, what often happens is a bird will fly all night, they'll get to us, and their gas tank will be empty. And so we'll be able to see that. They won't have any fat on their body. And then they stay, typically birds stay, it's called stopover. They stay at our station for 3 days up to about 8 days to refill that gas tank, so get more fat. And it's really exciting when we catch a recapture because we get to see how well they've fattened up since the last time we saw them. And that gives us great clues. So if they're able to fatten quickly and they don't stay here very long, that tells us this habitat is really valuable for that species. And so we're able to kind of get clues to how well bird species are doing based on those recaptures of those fat birds.
All right. Mrs.
All right,
Rice,
I hope you heard that.
Do you want to try, Mrs. Rice, and share your screen? Oh, I see it there. So I can pop this in if your students want to wait.
There's my kids.
There they are.
All right, kids, there you are. See, you can turn on your cameras and wave.
Hey, everyone.
We got a nice
See
group here today.
Hey, everyone.
This is my online school of infinite mirror. Thank you.
Very cool.
Right on. And there's just one more question. I kind of good one here. Like, how many birds about do you catch each day? Thank you. How many birds do you catch each day? That was our last one here.
Good question. So yesterday was kind of a boring day. We only had about 20 birds. Our record at this station is about 400 birds a day. So I would say average right now is probably around 100 birds. I bet we'll pass 100 today. And for the season, we get anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 birds a year. So.
All right.
Wow.
Well, Mrs.
All right. Thank you so
Rice
much.
is through. We will come back to you. We'll check at the end and see if there's any more questions. Oh, it looks like we have another chickadee.
A surprise, another chickadee. You guys are going to be mountain chickadee experts. This one is, he was giving me a little nibble there for a second. All right. See you later, bud.
All right. Let's grab another classroom here. We have in Milton, Ontario, some fourth graders hanging out with us. Let me bring them in front and center. Hey, fourth graders. How we doing? All right. Looks like a lineup with a few questions. Let's get some questions.
Which songbird is the rarest?
Ooh, the rarest. So we're a station in the western United States. And so the rare birds we catch are birds from the east coast of the United States. And vice versa. So I have a friend who is studying birds in Texas, and they caught a bird, a western flycatcher that's very common for us, but really rare for them. So anytime we get a bird that's kind of out of place and not where it's supposed to be, we're pretty excited. That happens most often with warblers. So like black-throated blue warbler or chestnut-sided warbler. Those are some rare ones for us.
All
Good
right.
question.
Great question. Who's next? I think I see someone else there. There we go.
What do the birds do when they're not in captivity and there's a storm? Like in a thunderstorm?
Good question. So these are very tough little birds. And so when a storm hits, they'll take shelter. So especially in these trees you can see above me, they find kind of the thickest vegetation they can find. So a really thick shrub or a really thick tree to protect them. But honestly, I wonder that sometimes too, especially when you get a big hailstorm. I'm always wondering where all those little birds are. But barometric pressure change, so they probably know that a storm is coming just as well as we do with our weather forecasters. So they know when it's time to take shelter. We also do see birds will fatten up ahead of a storm in the wintertime on purpose because they know that maybe they're going to have to hide and not be able to eat for a while. So they'll fatten up to get some energy to survive.
So then, what happens with snow?
Oh.
How does it snow? What happens when there's like snow?
When there's snow?
Yeah, like snow. Like it's too cold for them. Do they have to go like? Do they have to like go? Is there like a? Is there like they go into a hut or something like that, or they hide in the trees?
They mostly hide in the trees, and a lot of these species. This is a junco, by the way, the dark-eyed junco, and their nickname is snowbird. Actually, birds can control their feathers, so like when you get goosebumps on your arm and the hairs on your arm stand up, birds can control their feathers on purpose to raise them and lower them. So if they're cold, they fluff up their feathers, and that gives them extra insulation, almost like a down coat. And then if they are feeling hot, they can slick those feathers down flat and cool themselves off. So pretty cool. Can you imagine having a built-in coat? You could just poof, all of a sudden you have a nice fluffy winter coat. This junco, we actually have a question about it because we can tell if they're a male or a female based on their feathers, but this one is an adult and it's kind of in between feather-wise. I guess I would say male, but I would go by wing length too. Oh, 80. Okay, yeah, I like male. Okay, so little junco. They have cool white tail feathers. We'll let this guy fly. Is this guy good to go? Well, okay. Okay, I can take more questions while I show off birds.
All right, we'll grab one more, and then we'll check YouTube.
Okay.
I was wondering that how do they sing?
Ooh, how do they sing? That's a really good question. The short answer is, here goes this little kinglet. The short answer is birds, instead of having one voice box up here in their throat like we do, they have a split voice box called a syrinx that's down where their lungs are. And so they can do really complex sounds because they can sing out of one half and the other half at the same time. So imagine if you could say two completely different sentences at the same time. Birds can do that. So pretty cool.
Okay.
All right, very cool. So Heidi, I'll just grab a question or two here from YouTube. Challenges. What are some of the challenges birds face on their migrations?
Yeah, so we already kind of talked about storms, so weather can be a big challenge for them. Bird conservation wise, habitat loss, of course, is kind of the #1 threat to birds, because, you know, there used to be lots and lots of forest and grassland and wetlands for birds, and now humans are kind of taking up some of that space. One of the other big impacts, especially for migrating birds, is windows. So if you have windows at your house, you can turn the lights off at night so that these migrating birds passing by don't get confused by the lights. And big cities like Toronto is actually really famous for having a cool bird conservation program where they turn the city lights out at night. But birds can get confused by lights. So kind of like moths will fly around a light at night and get confused and lost. That can happen to birds as well. So like at my house, I always make sure that I have my lights off in the middle of the night, so that I'm not adding any confusion for those little guys. And then outdoor cats is actually the #1 cause of bird mortality. So cats catch and kill a lot of birds. So if you have any pet cats, you can train them to walk on a harness to go outside, or keep them inside, and that's a really good way to protect birds if you can.
All right. And Heidi, is now a good time of the year to have some seed out to maybe help them along the way on their migration?
Yeah, you can. So there's lots of natural food available for birds as well, but bird feeders don't hurt anything, and they're a great way to be able to see migrating birds up close. So I always like to put out some bird seed in the fall and the winter time, to see what interesting birds will come in. So yeah, it's a good way to get to see birds up close. And yeah, they definitely are grateful to find some seed if you leave it out for them. So.
All right. Looks like we have a couple more questions from the Elevated Digital Learning Academy. So I'm going to bring Mrs. Rice back in here. I think we've got a question from Keanu. It looks like one from Lily as well. Yeah. Okay. Is it easier if I read it so you don't have to switch the sound around? Okay. Okay. So Keanu would like to know, the birds that we saw, are they helpful to the environment? Do they do anything that helps the environment?
Well, I would argue that they all are helpful to the environment. So, you know, all of these birds are part of the ecosystem. So they're eating things and being eaten, and it's all part of the web of life. But I would say birds are super important because they eat a lot of insects. So I can't imagine how many insects would be around if we didn't have these birds to eat them. So especially birds like swallows, they can eat thousands and thousands of mosquitoes per night. So every time I see swallows or flycatchers around, I'm really thankful for them. This is the little red-breasted nuthatch, so this is a new species. They have this really upturned beak. They're good at stashing. They actually will find seeds and shove them into little cracks, and then remember where they are and come back to them for later in the winter. And here's their little red breast. This one looks like a female. She has kind of a grayish head. But yeah, I can take another question too.
Okay, we do have one. So Lily wants to know the number on their band. Are all the digits different, or is it just the last 3 digits?
So the prefix, so the beginning of the band, is the same for each band size. So like the 0 bands that we have today all begin in 3010 and then 28145. So then the next band we have will be 28146 and then 28147. Other banding stations will have a totally different sequence. So we know if we've caught a bird from somewhere else, because we won't recognize that band prefix. So instead of 3010, it'll be something totally different. So anytime we see a new prefix, we get excited. All right, I'm gonna let this little lady fly.
All right. Viola Desmond Public School, do you have a couple questions there for us?
Does the weather affect their food?
Yes, does the weather affect their food? So it really does for our birds that eat insects. So that's actually one of the main reasons a lot of these species migrate. So a yellow warbler is a great example. They love eating caterpillars and juicy insects. And so in the summertime, they do great here in Idaho. But Idaho in the wintertime is really snowy and cold. So yellow warblers actually have to migrate. They have to leave if they want to survive because they only eat insects. So the weather really affects insects for a lot of these insectivore birds.
How do you guys know like what color like means what in their on the bird?
Oh, good question. Let me see if I'll grab the book. There's a book called The Pile Guide, and it is maybe, well, both the most exciting and interesting, but also most boring book you'll ever read. So you can see we have tabs here marking our different species so that we can look them up and see, you know, oh, what color should a female dark-eyed junco's head be? But it's very dense, so I don't know if you guys can see. It's just all words. There's no pretty pictures, but it describes in detail every single thing about the birds that we're catching. So when they molt and grow new feathers, when they nest, whether you can tell if they're a male or a female. So for example, our mountain chickadees, we can't tell if they're males or females. Males and females are about the same size, and their feathers look the same too. So depending on the bird, we can look it up and figure out a lot about it.
Thanks.
Yeah, good question.
How big do they get?
Oh, very good question, and I forgot to mention. So all the birds we're catching today are full grown. So like that ruby crowned kinglet, that teeny little bird, she's going to be 6 grams for the rest of her life. Once songbirds leave the nest, they're pretty much full grown and the same size as their parents, which is good for us because we know that we can put a band on their leg and their leg isn't going to change size. So we know that band will always fit their leg.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you. How long do they live for?
That's another good question. So these little songbirds, probably on average, like when we catch a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old songbird, that's pretty good. The records are really high. So we actually just last year recaught the world record for the oldest black-headed grosbeak, which is kind of a medium-sized songbird, and he was 15 years old. So we nicknamed him Grandpa Grosbeak because he was so old.
How old was he?
15.
15? Is that the oldest bird you have?
Yeah.
Oh,
Pretty old, right?
really old. Thanks.
All right, very cool. Great questions. Sue, I've got one more here from Judah. Judah wants to know how long you've been working at the Intermountain Bird Observatory, and did you need to train to master your bird banding skills?
Oh, yeah. So I've been working here for 15 years, which I still can't believe sometimes. But I started out when I was at university. So after my very first year, I was a freshman, and I came up to this station to volunteer. And I started learning about what they do and what data we collect. And then I stuck around. I never left. So to do what we're doing today, so like our crew, most of them have done 4 years of university, so they've done a bachelor's degree. And then most of them are going to go and get a master's degree too, or a PhD. So 4 years of university, and then 2 years of a master's degree. If they do a PhD, it'll be about 4 years. So yeah, a lot of our technicians here though have been training for at least a year or so, and they have that degree.
Okay. Well, Heidi, I want to start off with a huge shout out to everybody working in the hut and with all those birds today. Very, very cool. Thank you so much for the work that they were doing. And Heidi, it's always an absolute blast to steal some of your time when you're out in the fall and to be able to do this. Today was a great day. We had so many birds.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I'll pass along your thanks. All the crew just went out to check the nets again because there's so many birds, but I'll tell them you guys said thanks.
All right, perfect. So we do still have a few groups hanging out with us. So I'll bring in Milton. I'll bring in Tahoe. If you guys want to give a big goodbye, big thank you, goodbye, big thank you to the crew.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, Heidi, thank you so much. We can't wait for our next trip to Idaho. We can't wait to see you again.
Yeah, see you again soon.
Thanks, Heidi.
Bye.